All right. So the first thing we had last Sunday, if you remember, was when we came to Mass, we had Palm Sunday. Didn't anyone get surprised that it was Palm Sunday? You rock up and everyone's outside of church where, with palms, and you're like, oh yeah, that's right. We're gonna bring those palms. But basically, the journey to Easter begins, really intensifies at Palm Sunday. So what did we? When we've got Palm Sunday followed by those days there, and of course, it's a way of incorporating and intensifying our involvement with the gospel story with Jesus by entering into his story, so that his story becomes our story. And so what does Jesus do? He firstly raises Lazarus from the dead. He's about 2 miles outside of Jerusalem, raises Lazarus to life. By doing so, he captures everybody's attention. Who is this guy entering Jerusalem? He gets on a donkey, he rides through the city gates of Jerusalem, and of course everyone hears that this Jesus who has risen, caused a dead man to rise to life, is going through the gates. They are so excited. And what do they cry? Son of David. Beautiful, Son of David, which actually is a royal title. It means that they recognize Jesus as being a descendant of King David, which actually means that he's eligible for the throne. And that is, well, not, as we know, not part of Jesus's plan. Because what do kings, when they get on the throne, do? Enough. Fighting wars, taxation, oppressing people, land grabbing. That's not what Jesus is about. And so how does he convince people that he is not the king that they expect him? Because what's happening here is they've got their cloaks on the ground. Are there any cloaks on the ground there? No, not yet. Okay, they've got their cloaks on the ground. They've got their palms waving. Do you know why they put the cloaks on the ground?
So no dust gets thrown up.
It's a very dusty place. Yeah, you're onto something. But it's as if I take out and hand you my business card. So if you know someone, or if you go to a conference or something and you find you're impressed by that person, you go, I want that person. I want to get to know that person. The people of Jerusalem see Jesus as their new king. They want to be on his side. And what do people do when they want you to be on their side? Well, by putting their cloak on the ground, it's a symbol of Jesus, let's be friends. Here is my business card. I am on your side. But the problem with that is that Jesus is entering into Jerusalem and they're going to make him a king, but Jesus is not someone who can be put on the throne. He's not a puppet king. He's a king that nobody anticipates, nobody expects of him. And so what does Jesus do? He rides straight into the temple and he sees, and this is right after the next chapter after this, he goes straight into the temple. He sees the money changers and people doing business, and infamously, what does he do? He flips the tables. He loses it. He's struck with that righteous anger. And so he basically throws out the money changers. If someone was to come in right now and start flipping tables and chairs, and someone came right through those doors, what would we think? Who is this guy? Who does he think he is? Let's call the police. Let's get him out of here. It's precisely what Jesus does. He is not a king who's going to be a puppet king. He's another sort of king, and we go and of course we can look and talk about that as we go along. So Palm Sunday, we've entered into the mystery of his passion and intensification of that. Tomorrow we are entering into the Easter Triduum, a word that sounds familiar. Tri means three holy days. Thursday, Holy Thursday, Good Friday, Holy Saturday. The intensification of of this. So if Palm Sunday is the beginning, it's really what I like to call the encounter. Jesus is on the big stage. There's 1 million people. The records would show that, we know this from the historian Josephus, he would say that there would be 1 million Jews that would congregate once a year, kind of like what did the Muslims do in Mecca? They the famous Hajj. Exactly, thank you. They all congregate. There's millions of pilgrims there. It's the same with the Passover. The city of Jerusalem would go from about 200,000 to about 1 million in the space of a week. An incredible escalation of numbers. And so this is right before Jesus's ministry that he's going to enter into. Right. Now, if that's how Jesus in the historical Gospels was how it was enacted, what do? Well, on Palm Sunday, we kind of we relived through that. The priest wears red. We have palm branches. We relive the Gospel account, the Passion account. Remember that really long Gospel that Father read in the middle of church? The reason we have that is that gets our memory and our kind of preparation ready as we hear the story. I don't know about you, but when I was reading through the Gospel at Mass last Sunday, I was thinking, oh, spoiler alert, we all sort of know what's going to happen to Jesus. But it's precisely that the church gives us so that we can enter into the mystery in a greater sense. And then we go to tomorrow, Holy Thursday, the beautiful, what we call Mangatum Thursday, where Jesus sets another. So he's had the encounter. Now the Holy Thursday is the legacy. And what is that legacy? Jesus gathers his disciples for the Passover. He brings his 12 disciples, 12 apostles together, and they celebrate the Passover. And at that Passover, which is the celebration of the Israelites leaving Egypt about 1,200 years prior, 1,400 years prior to that, they would left Egypt and entering into the Promised Land. But in that moment, when there's bread and wine, Jesus raises the Passover to a new level. He says, do this, take this, all of you, and eat it. This is my body. This is my blood. But there's also something else that he does, and that is, before he gets to that, there's also something else that he does, which is quite curious, and he washes their... Where's the laser? Where is it? I said that one. Nope. Maybe this dog doesn't have one. Okay. He washes their feet, which is really important, because it goes on to how we celebrate it. So tomorrow night in your local parish, we had a beautiful Holy Thursday Mass. It's done once a year. No other Mass may be celebrated on that day, meant to bring the parish community together. And we have we have two special things, the washing of the feet, but also it's where the Eucharist, the Eucharist, the consecrated bread, is brought from the tabernacle, brought to an altar of repose. And people say, oh wow, how novel, we're bringing Jesus out of the tabernacle into a separate space. They do that. People say, oh, how elaborate. But actually, this was common practice from done until about the 7th century, where the Eucharist was, after Mass, was collected. Tabernacles are a fairly recent invention, but the Eucharist was taken essentially to the back room and kept there. Why is it that we do that on Holy Thursday? Does anyone know what the significance for that particular thing is, where we take the Eucharist out of the tabernacle to somewhere else?
Is it the best way Jesus said, where I'm going, you will not be to follow me?
Very, very similar. Yeah, yep. There's actually, you're right about going places. Straight after the Last Supper, Jesus goes to the Garden of Gethsemane. And so and in order to bring ourselves into that story, we too go with Jesus to the metaphorical garden outside of the, of the holy space, the church, in order to follow Jesus where he goes as well. And then, of course, we have the stripping of the altar, which people go, oh yeah, look, we're stripping the altar. We're taking away all those things that we use to celebrate. Why? Because we're diminishing. We're going deeper and deeper into the mystery. We do things to help us concentrate and accentuate what we're celebrating. But also, curiously, does anyone know why we use altar cloths? We've got some beautiful altar cloths on our altar here in the chapel. We've got you have altar cloths all over the place. Why do we use altar cloths? Is it just so it looks nice? You have an altar cloth on your table at dinner, at home. Why do we specifically have altar cloths in our churches? The altar signifies Christ. When we celebrate Mass on an altar, the altar is actually a symbolic representation of Christ, which is pretty profound. Altar cloths, therefore, are over the body of Christ, over the altar. And so what the altar cloths actually do is signify the sacrifice of Jesus when he was wrapped in cloths and put into a tomb. The altar cloths the symbolic pointing to what has happened before, which is kind of phenomenal, and deeply symbolic and rich in meaning. That if the altar symbolizes Christ, if the altar cloth symbolizes the linen that Jesus was wrapped in after his death, then therefore the Eucharist that is placed on the altar, that is consecrated, is really the resurrected, glorified presence of Jesus once again, which is pretty astounding. Okay, cool. Jesus washes feet. So at that Passover, before the Passover, Jesus takes a towel and a bowl of water, and he begins to wash feet. And we might think, look, that's really cute, how good, Jesus, becoming humble, he's teaching us a lesson. But when we actually look at the reality, what this actually looks like, feet are rather unattractive. I don't know about you, but I could never be a podiatrist, just dealing with feet all day after day. But there are some brilliant podiatrists around. But when we look at feet, they are a symbol of a number of things that we could reflect on. What is the reality of Jesus washing feet? Cleaning feet is hard work. It's yucky. It's an unpleasant activity. We have evidence that when it would be reserved, washing feet in the Middle East would be reserved for slaves, and we've got evidence that even the Jewish slaves would refuse to wash people's feet, and they would actually get pagan slaves to do that work. The master comes into the house after a long dusty day, and the master would sit down. I want you to wash my feet. That's particularly humiliating, but it's also something that is deeply of service, particularly if you can't if you're not flexible and you get your feet washed. And what is the spiritual reality? Spiritual reality is that you have to get involved, to be part. What Jesus does for Peter and his disciples is something that he gets involved in their lives in the most intimate of ways, washing their feet, and that doing the work that no one else wants to do. I think particularly in our Catholic tradition, there are plenty of things that people that have gone before us that have done precisely that. I think of healthcare and teaching and going off as missionaries to far distant places, that there is some work that that no one else is willing to do, but yet we have these awesome Christians that have gone off and done these things as a life of service. And I'll give you an example. About 100 years ago, there was a group of Irish nuns from the St. John of God congregation, and up north, in the far north of the Kimberley, there was a place called Derby, and in Derby, the local indigenous there had contracted the dreaded disease of leprosy, and there was no healthcare there in Derby 100 years ago. No one was up there, no one was going up there, and they were slowly dying. The St. John of God sisters, they saw this, and they got on a boat, and they went straight up there, and then 100 years ago, they started a clinic for leprosy. We think leprosy is just that sort of disease that we hear about in the Bible, but we had leprosy here in Western Australia less than 100 years ago. And even up until about 20 or 30 years, the St. John of God sisters were there year after year, looking after these patients with leprosy, treating them, bandaging them at their sores, helping them, assisting with their infections when no one else wanted to do it. And guess what? These sisters, they didn't even get paid. They didn't even get paid for it. They just did it to serve their brothers and sisters. Beautiful. And that's our reality as well. When we wash, the metaphor of washing feet means to get involved, to do that work which no one else wants to do. And then we have Good Friday, when we enter into the depths of death, when Christ himself is nailed on that cross, and that is the event, the Paschal sacrifice. It comes from a Latin word, Paschali, meaning sacrifice. We might have heard the Paschal Mystery. The Paschal Mystery is essentially the death, the passion, crucifixion, death, and resurrection of Jesus. But Paschal Mystery is what we call the for sacrifice. And I like to think of Good Friday as the triumph of failure. You have the Son of God who's come to earth. He's spent 30 years growing up. He becomes 30 years of age. He calls his disciples together. He preaches. He works miracles. He continually clashes against the Pharisees, and after 3 years, he dies on a cross. He dies a pretty embarrassing way to die. His disciples run away. For that, it sounds like, it's pretty much a big failure. But of course, we know what happens next. That triumph of failure means that even when things are falling apart, when everything looks like it's an absolute failure, that when God gets involved, that there is often a hidden mystery that's at work as well. That God somehow is able to change the worst failure into something else that can enrich and inspire us. So we've got Good Friday. How do we celebrate? Well, often the color is red. The red for blood. We have the cross that is processed down the middle of the church. The priest, the cross is veiled in a purple or red garment, and of course the priest then chants, "Behold the wood of the cross, come, let us adore." There's no mass, only communion service, and then we have the veneration of the cross as a sign of victory, the cross sign of our salvation. Okay, there's Jesus, the triumph of failure, when everything seems lost. When God gets involved, nothing is lost. All right. Cool. We have the 3:00 Good Friday Passion, and then Saturday, everything's quiet. Everything hopefully is quiet. A day of reflection, a day of prayer, and then we enter into Saturday. It's called Holy Saturday Vigil because vigils are important in the life of the church. And this is the mother of all vigils. It's called the ceremony of light, also known as the lucidarium, like lucy meaning light. And why do we celebrate vigils? Well, there's a reckoning that Christ's resurrection, bodily resurrection, was somewhere between 12 a.m. and, that should be 6 a.m. Sorry, sorry, typo, 6 a.m. So in anticipation of that, so we have the Saturday vigil, and here's a little thing for exciting on that. So it all comes back to the Passover. The Israelites were in Egypt. They were ready to get out of Egypt. That night they were to have a Passover with lamb, bread, and wine. And that night was meant to be an anticipatory night to eat and to get ready to go. And so the vigils are a way of keeping that there is a expectation that something will happen because God gets involved. And we see in church all around, this is a photo that captures the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. This is the probably one of the most holiest places in the world that we have. This little like kind of church here is called an edicule. So Aisha, I've just realized I've got the night sky. It's actually a proper church with a roof. It just happens to be the stars at night happen to be the slide, but it felt like a Colosseum really. But imagine a domed church, and this little church inside is called the edicule, and tradition believes that there's a marble slab, and they believe that Jesus was placed there in the tomb. So you've got this sort of marble slab. You go into this little room inside that church, and you can say your prayers. And hopefully, one day, God willing, you can get to Jerusalem to see it. But this is during the Holy Saturday Vigil, powerful, beautiful expression of faith. So, how do we celebrate? Well, we celebrate by bringing brand new Catholics into the church on Holy Saturday. We have the lighting of the fire. We all gather outside, and they have the Paschal fire, the symbol of light, and the Exultate, a special hymn of praise is sung. And the light is so important. First of all, it's dark. You have this darkness, that's this anticipatory darkness that is all around us at night. Then we have this fire symbolizing the very light of Christ. The priest, the bishop will bless it. And then then that light will be transferred to what is the Paschal candle. And we see here the Paschal candle. It's this long, kind of tall candle that for an altar server or a deacon will hold. This is deeply symbolic, and of course, when it's blessed, the light coming from the candle is a symbol, a sacramental symbol of the light of Christ, the light of Christ, the presence in the church. So here's a few things that are for example, in the ceremony. There's grains of incense placed in the candle, representing all the 5 wounds of Christ. We've got the cross. We have the P and the X, the Pax, the Alpha, the Omega, the first and the last, the Lamb of God down there. And so these candles are a beautiful symbol of it. What is Holy Saturday? The triumph of light over darkness. As I don't know where the quote came, but they said no amount of darkness can overcome the light. We don't just see it, but we also become the light, which is really important for those, when we enter into the Easter mystery, we not only see what is happening before us, but we ourselves receive what we have been given, and we become bearers of that light to the world around us. As the baptism ritual says, this light is entrusted you to be kept burning brightly. So all of us had this light of Christ. Okay. Final song. What does Easter mean to us? And this is important because what Easter means for us really is just as the renewal of life that Jesus received in his resurrection also means that we too get to share that life in a new reality. What is this? What does the Easter and the resurrection mean to us? But it's also important to know that as Christians, as St. Paul says, if Christ hadn't rose from the dead, then our faith is what do they call it? What did he say? In vain, is useless. If Christ hasn't rose from the dead, and then you know what? Maybe we should just pack up and go home. And there are some people that believe that Christ didn't rise from the dead. Would you be able to say confidently that Christ has risen from the dead? Well, I had to think about that myself. And I was thinking, that's a good question. How do we know that Jesus has risen from the dead? Well, if someone was to ask you tomorrow, or maybe even on Easter Sunday, what are you celebrating? We're celebrating Christ rising from the dead. Would we be able to have a response that would actually convince them to believe too? So let's look at that together. The resurrection is either the greatest lie or the greatest story ever witnessed. So here we are. If you want to take a photo of this, or we can put these slides up. One of the things about the resurrection is that we can be confident that it is a truth that we can believe and that we can prove. And so one of the things Jesus appeared to over 500 of the disciples. You don't appear to 500 people and then those 500 people make it up. What do we hear time and time again on that Easter Sunday morning when Mary went to the tomb? She had herbs and spices to anoint a dead body. And when she comes to the tomb, and depending on which testimony, the testimony is that she couldn't find the body. The stone had been rolled away. And then when she'd assumed that the body had been stolen. Again, reiterating this fact that the disciples had really, really believed that Jesus had died and that he wasn't coming back. Quite amazing. The Christian story, the life of Christ would have easily ended and died just as soon as Jesus had lived and died as well. Now it says here that women were not credible eyewitnesses. Sorry about that, but in first century Palestine, the female testimony was not honoured in court. It was not respected. You could not accurately get an eyewitness. Yet here is her testimony, Mary Magdalene, being believed because the disciples saw him themselves too. But also, Mary goes into the room where all the disciples are hiding, and who comes out? Those two disciples, Peter and John, based on Mary's testimony. It was just so incredible. Until that time, they had failed to realize that he must rise from the dead. So time and time again, Jesus' disciples didn't believe that he would rise from the dead. How can you promote something when the original people, the original followers, don't believe that in the resurrection or weren't aware of it? And so unless there was something that happened in their midst, unless Jesus actually appeared to them, which he did, and you can read about this in John's Gospel. Guys, here I am. There's another hypothesis. Some people will say, Jesus didn't die on the cross. Well, there's several errors with that. Roman soldiers in first century Palestine were very good at their job. If they were ordered to execute you, they executed you properly and efficiently. But also, and there's also another way where Jesus actually woke up in the tomb and then he rolled the stone away and ran off and lived happily ever after. But you've got medical problems associated with that. You've got all sorts of complications with blood loss, lack of water, lack of food, stiffness, and a heavy stone that weighs, 500 kilos or a ton. It's just not gonna happen. A made-up story would not have lasted more than a week. His body was never recovered. This is the stolen body theory. So they say, they just stole their body, but in first century Palestine, the body would have easily been found with an investigation. Again, we might actually say, and you read about it in the Gospel of Matthew, where they say the scribes, the Pharisees, paid the Roman soldiers to say, yes, we were asleep, and the soldiers came and stole the body away. Again, the penalty for a Roman soldier to fall asleep on duty was that they would be executed. Chances are you're not going to risk your life falling asleep, particularly if there's several guards at the entrance of the tomb. It just wouldn't have happened. Again, and I'll just run through these quickly for the amount of time. Thomas, one of Jesus' closest disciples, who ate, drank, and heard Jesus for 3 years, even he was dubious. Guys, if I don't see Jesus, I'm not believing. They're like, he's alive. You should. And he's like, I don't believe you, until that beautiful story of Jesus appearing to Thomas and saying, and what does Thomas say? My Lord and my God. Beautiful kind of reconversion. The empty tomb was never denied by the Jewish authorities. They only popularized the soul and body theory. But also as well, Jesus is either a liar, a lunatic, or the Lord. And that's a theory that came from C.S. Lewis. We probably don't have time to go into each of those three, but a liar generally lies until usually a liar would lie to get what they want. You don't lie so that you can be crucified and be thrust with a spear and there's no monetary value for you or whatever. A lunatic, generally lunatics are pretty one-time events. They usually have a few followers, but any persecution or anything, it usually dissolves. That didn't happen with Christ. Or Jesus is the Lord. And that supernatural event won hearts and minds. Okay. Penultimate slide. The tomb was never venerated as a shrine. Often you have believers or devotees of popular people who have like a shrine to someone who's a somebody. Well, the resurrection tomb was never, wasn't bothered about because it wasn't a tomb. It was just like a short-term Airbnb accommodation. And then the third, the last one is that all the apostles, except for John, died for Jesus. Why would you die for a dead man? You only died for someone who you believe is credible. And the apostles were never accused as frauds, which is interesting. If the Jewish authorities knew that they were doing this cover-up, they would have been accused of frauds, but they weren't. There's no evidence of that. Again, the apostles were so convinced about Jesus, they were beaten, persecuted, and killed. No one does that for a lie. In fact, they went and popularized it with that new zeal and enthusiasm all around the known world. And this little quote from Pope Benedict, I think, is a curtain way to finish tonight's presentation. Faith in the resurrection of Jesus says that there is a future for every human being. So let's rejoice at that fact that each of us has a future, and that as we participate into the very mystery of the resurrection, our faith will be strengthened, fulfilled, nourished, and we can meet the risen Lord once again on Easter Sunday. God bless you all. Thank you.